Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Some of you might remember that just as Vicar Amanda is completing her internship among us, and we have had other interns here, I did my internship in western Nebraska. It was a completely different culture, and most of the people were farmers and ranchers. At times we had people ride their horses into town for Sunday worship. The corn really was 10 feet tall in places. We went to rodeos. But the weather was a bit different too. There was the cold, for example. We experienced 30 below zero with a 50 below wind chill. There were tornadoes too. But the thing that caught my attention in a unique way was the hail. Thunderstorms out there often also contained hail. And in fact, I was surprised to learn that farmers out there could buy hail insurance. I thought that was ridiculous until one day one of the farmers took me out and showed me some 8-foot-high corn, and right beside it, a swath that was nothing but stubble just an inch or so high. That was what was left after a hailstorm. Suddenly I understood one of the biblical plagues a little better. Perhaps you remember the story about the plagues. The Hebrew people were slaves in Egypt, and God sent Moses to lead them to freedom. However, the Pharaoh didn't let the people go, and so God sent plagues upon Egypt to help convince the Pharaoh otherwise. There were 10, and they involved things like turning the Nile into blood, frogs, boils, gnats, and more. The 7th plague turned out to be a fierce hailstorm. This story is told in Exodus 9. One important thing to note is that it wasn't that it hailed and then Moses said that God did this. No, Moses said, "Tomorrow it's going to hail," and it did. Forecasting the weather like that is hard even now, much less then. So it was clear that God was behind it. As you might expect, Pharaoh refused to listen, but there were some in his court who had learned that they should listen to Moses, and so they immediately sent their cattle under shelter to protect them. But for those who ignored God's word through Moses, their cattle died. Then we might think that otherwise this plague wasn't so bad. We might think a day of rain and hail isn't a lasting problem. Well, it was if all your cattle died. And it was even more of a problem for the crops that would be utterly destroyed. Remember that in those days you didn't just run down to the store to get food. You had to grow it. And if your crop was wiped out, then you had nothing to live on for the next year. It was a serious problem. The Bible is explicit in telling us that the flax and the barley were ruined, but the wheat and the spelt, which are crops that come up later in the summer, were okay. Perhaps that's a small way to let us know that even in God's judgment and punishment, there is still an element of mercy and grace. It wouldn't be easy, but it was survivable. You probably remember how the story ends. The Pharaoh relented, and Moses stretched out his hand, and the Bible tells us the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain no longer poured down on the earth. As soon as that happened, Pharaoh changed his mind again and did not let the people go. But let's not forget the good news in the midst of this story. The grace and mercy of God that all the crops were not destroyed. And when we face difficulty and trouble, maybe we can remember the wheat and the spelt and know that with God we have hope for the future. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.